Thanks for being here. A little background to myself, and as I told you already, I'm in Germany, in Berlin. I've had a bit of a schizophrenic career most of my life. I started when I was 10, I started programming. When I was 13, I started my second computer, and I built databases and did like large enterprise projects for big corporations. And I keep finding that the one thing that was missing with all that awesome technology and all these cool processes were humans. Like nobody actually gave a shit about the humans, and by not asking them, by not connecting with them, there was so much money wasted. And so much stupid stuff that happened where I'm like, dude, why don't we just be human with each other and make it so much simpler, right? And I've had a bit of an advantage because when I was a young kid, I was very hyperactive. When I was like today, we'd say ADHD kids, and just they're constantly running around. And so my dad just handed me a bunch of yoga and meditation tapes and said, here, go learn this. And so that's kind of how it started for me. Getting into yoga, getting into different transformational stuff, alchemy, psychology, different from pop psychology all the way to some of the really weird occult stuff. And so it's a bit of my background, and now I'm bringing those two together and essentially focusing on how do you create the future, how do we do this together, right? How do we create new operating systems and cultures to do this, and really what does it take from the individual, right? Like who do you need to be as an individual to lead the future, to really be part of that community that's deciding who we want to be next as humans. And now we had 2020, which was an awesome year in my mind because sort of the future just went mainstream, and as Captain Kirks would say, shit just got real. And it's like, okay, here we are now, and all these people were like, oh, my normal little life, so they're going, what's going on, right? And it's a bit of a awakening moment, and people are realizing that this thing of, you might have heard the term VUCA, right, which was a military term originally, stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? That's actually the current normal, right? That used to be for special situations where you send in the special troops, Navy SEALs and things like that, because you had this like coordinated war. And then you had this like, oh shit, stuff changes all the time. It's really uncertain. It's super complex because there's so many players and you don't really know who to trust anymore. Right? If you think about the current situation, everything changed very quickly. Right? There's a lot of uncertainty, although we have a shit ton of data. Right? We don't really know what's real anymore. Right? The complexity of it internationally is huge. And even the ambiguity is there because you're like, okay, do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? Is this all bullshit? Is Corona real? Is it not real? I don't know who to trust anymore. Right? And so how do you deal with that? Right? And there's a lot of anxiety around it. And I love this quote by Marshall McLuhan, who said that anxiety is really in great part a result of trying to do today's jobs with yesterday's tools and concepts. Right? If I'm actually present to the moment, then I can find a solution. If I'm trying to solve it with what I know worked yesterday, that's going to make me a little anxious. Right? And really the understanding is that life as we know it is over. Right? And it's not going back to normal. Right? There's going to be more new things, and the next big wave is climate change. Right? There's all these other things that are also happening. We're done with a nice little cushy normal life. Right? And it's also a call to action because, as McLuhan also said, there's no passengers in space or Earth. There's only crew. Right? Each one of us is not just here to have a nice ride and get laid and drink some beers and have fun. We're also here to really participate in life. We're all called to create future. Right? And we're actually doing it in every moment. Right, with every decision you make, with being here right now, with what you ate for breakfast today, with how you're showing up to your friends. In every moment, you're creating future. Right? And the good news is we're doing this together. The bad news is we're all in this together too. Right? And we have to come to terms with diversity, right? And really understanding. And for me, diversity doesn't mean, what capabilities you have, or what skin color you have, or what sexual orientation you have, or equipment you have, or man, woman. All that stuff is bullshit in my mind. You have to understand that none of us really knows what's going on. And you might have heard the story do you know that story of the blind man and the elephant? Have you heard that before? It's an old Indian story.
Yes, but I wouldn't mind you.
I'll go again. Yeah, no worries. Yes, so, there's a story about the blind man, and essentially, they walk down the road and suddenly they come upon this thing. And the first guy runs into this thing and he's like, oh, puts his hands up and he's like, oh, it's a wall, man, it's a wall. Right, and the second one is a little bit closer to the ground, and he's like, no, man, it's a tree. Right, and the third one says, it's a bush, and it's a snake. And then they start beating each other and getting a whole fist fight about who's right. Right, and if you look at politics, if you look at business meetings, oftentimes I see exactly that, or late night talk shows. Right, there's a whole bunch of people all insisting who's right. And we have to all accept that none of us knows. Right, we all have a little piece of reality. We all have that little thing that we can see. And it would really behoove us to say, okay, what do you see? And what do you see? And what do you see? Because when we all ask each other about what we see, then we can maybe find the elephant one day. You know what I mean? But that's really the key for me to diversity, is to understand we're all different. We're all expressions of life. And that's okay. right? And so we have to create together somehow if we want to do this, right? And really integrate more than ever, right? We have these seemingly very, very diverse cultures in the world, right? And then I lived in 3 continents and worked in 20, 30 different countries. And what I found is that everybody, wants to find the toilet when they need it, and everybody, no worries. And, everybody wants to eat and be loved and belong, and that's really all humans ever want. And so we've got to figure out how to do this together now, and really create a new cultural operating system for planet Earth. Right? And if you think about how culture is created, or cultural operating systems are created, in terms of here's sort of what's acceptable, right, and how we do things around here. Right, it usually starts with artists in the widest sense, in the sense of storytellers and who create new narratives, right, who say, hey, this is who we could be as humans, right, this is who we could become, this is who we could, evolve into, this is what the world could look like. And welcome, Ellen. We're just talking about how cultural operating systems are formed and how we live today on planet Earth, how they came to be. Right? We had artists who, in the widest sense, who created new stories and new narratives about what the world could look like. We had entrepreneurs and people who prototype new solutions. We had people inside of organizations who are trying to scale it and make it big. Right? And you have activists and NGOs who are making sure that this doesn't go crazy. And then you have sort of educators and teachers, right? And so together they all essentially go outside of the existing operating system, which makes it really hard to be in any of those positions. And it's not by chance that artists, for example, have the highest suicide rates in society, right? And entrepreneurs are shortly after that. And there's a huge dark number around these people. But if it succeeds, right, they're essentially expanding the operating system and trying to, bring back to the society what we have, what they've learned out there, in the idea of ultimately stretching it and creating a new operating system that works for more people. And so you being here, and hi Alan, welcome Trey and Alan, I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about, in the sense that this is not easy, right? And because if you bring something new in, you get a lot of rejection, right? And if you take even a bacterial culture, and you have sort of the outside bacteria going out and exploring the environment and finding new receptors, if they signal back to the colony what they found, and the colony signals back, we don't need that, or we don't get it, we don't understand it, what happens is that the cell actually kills itself. And there's apoptosis, which is cell suicide, that actually happens on a biological level. So if an organic system doesn't feel like it's wanted by the community, it tends to die. Right? And so it's really tough to be an innovator and bring in something new, because that biological response. And so you have to figure out how to create yourself again, anew, again and again and again. Right, and really overcome those little deaths and turn them into transformations for yourself. So that, of course, starts with even asking, who am I? And when I asked the question, who am I? Well, it naturally comes up with a bunch of stories. And I said at the beginning, here's a couple of my stories of how I get to be who I am. Right, but it's just stories. Right? And it's just that superficial level of who I am. So really maybe a better question, if I want to get into the human operating system and understanding myself, is to say, who is I? Who is this thing that I consider I? Right? What's at the root of that? On a very basic level, I seem to be alive. Right? I seem to be alive. Right? I really seem to be life. So on the most basic level, I'm life, just like everything else that's alive, just every plant, every animal, every tree, every other human. We're all, one of the things, if we want to find a commonality that's easy, we're all life. Right? And as life, I seem to, on the very root here, be this sort of elementary canal, right, that goes from mouth to my back. And that's sort of, unless we assume that worms are more superior and more evolved than we are, if you think about human evolution, it be ultimately this long canal from here to here, right, 30 feet long, and all the rest of this stuff that we consider ourselves in this body kind of just evolved to get this better food and make sure it procreates. So the very foundation of that, and that's actually more of a spaceship, because there's thousands of different species who live in it. Right? The majority of my DNA is not even mine. Right? So I'm really the spaceship that's walking through space on Earth, right, hosting all these different little organisms. On the very outside, if I look at myself, I can say, who am I? I can look at my behaviors. Or I'm the guy who does this every day. Right? Or I'm the guy who goes to work here. Or I'm the guy who does this. Right? And especially when our behaviors, they're sometimes exceptional, but a lot of them are repeats. Right? The habits, right? We brush our teeth in the same kind of manner nearly every day. Right? And that's sort of where we have routines. Right? We have habits that are actually time and space bound. And then we have rituals in terms of a more decoupled from space and time, but a ritual we can do anywhere. Right? Like, for example, I travel a lot, so for me, I have my whole morning ritual, but I can do that in any hotel room. Right? I can do my workout, I can brush my teeth, I can do my meditation. All these things I don't have to have routine, I can have ritual. Right? Of course, when those go a little bad, they go into addiction. Right? When actually ultimately the habit owns us and it makes us do things that we don't even want to do. And that's sort of this very external thing that people can see, but it's driven by internally who I define myself as, my archetypes, right? Like who I think I am, right? And who I want to be and who I identify with. If you think about your archetypes, it's really easy to find them. If you think about movies or books you've read, right? And really think about what are sort of the characters you resonate with, right? Some people want to be the hero, but some people don't want to be the hero, right? Like, for example, when it comes to King Arthur, I'd rather be Merlin than King Arthur. Right? And so if you think about stories or books that you've read or movies you've seen, what's the character that you resonate with? Right? What are some of the characters that inspire you where you say, hey, this is the kind of person I would play in this game? So there's your sort of internal archetypes. And then, of course, there's your opus. And opus is a Latin word. It means your work, right? Your creation, the stuff that you leave behind on this planet that will be there when you're gone. Right? And if you want to create an opus, if you want to create work here, you also, of course, have an operating system, right? Same room operating system. And I do come from technology, hence I like those metaphors. And it really just says, how am I functioning? Right? What are the different components of who I am? And you've already seen this picture a few times, and obviously like that left, right, brain, half concept. You might have seen this picture, which is actually the same content, and it's a smart, it's an Egyptian goddess. And it's her two wings, right? And it's the two wings of left brain, right brain. The shamans in South America talk about living in between the wings of the hummingbird, right? It's the same idea of actually activating both of your brain halves. You also have this picture, might know this symbol, right? There's those wings again and some snakes that are curled around. And when people see this, they're like, oh, medical symbol, right? But this is actually the staff of Caduceus, of Hermes, later Mercury in Roman gods, and before then Thoth in Egyptian goddess. But what it's actually saying is his staff, and Hermes is a messenger god, right? He communicates from the gods to the humans, right? From up and down. That's his job, right? And it's actually not the medical system. This is the medical system. It's Aesculap's staff, which only has one snake, right? And those two snakes, that symbol is actually much, much older. And you see that here, this is Ningishzida, which is actually from Sumeria, 3,000-4,000 years old. We've already had that same symbolism of the snakes and the wings. That same symbolism already existed there as well. And what I actually think this is, it's a beautiful map of a human operating system, right? We already talked about left brain and right brain, right? So those are the two wings, right? The dot in the middle is actually a pineal gland. And you might have seen this picture, which is the eye of Horus, right? Which is actually, if you take your brain and you cut it in half, that part of where the pineal gland sits kind of looks like that, actually, right? And you see that same symbol of pine cones from Sumeria to Egypt, all the way into the Catholic Church, and it keeps coming back. And so, if you look at this system, talking about the messenger, right? It's actually connecting your top, your pineal gland, all the way through the spine, through your nervous system with the rest of your body. And anytime you have an electric current running through a conduit, like if you take a cable and you have power running through it, like when you charge your phone or you plug in your lamp, when there's power running through it, there's actually an electromagnetic field around it. Right? In this case, you have two that are overlapping. And if you have two, right, because your brain is sending a signal to your little toe saying, wiggle your little toe, right? And then you send an electric signal all the way down to your little toe. And when your little toe gets stopped on the floor, you're like, ouch, right? Because that signal traveled from your little toe all the way to your brain. So you have these two currents, and if you put them together, right, then you create this wave pattern. But the same symbol in some ways exists around the world. You might have heard of chakras before. Is that familiar to you? Okay. So chakras is one way of expressing it, but you also have it in the tree of life in Judaism and Kabbalah. Right? You have a similar system in Pythagoras, where it's talking about the octaves. And Pythagoras back in the day actually had a secret society where before you were allowed to learn math, you had to learn all this stuff, and then you were allowed to learn math. Right? So he was teaching people in an initiatory society. You also have it even in the Bible in Jacob's ladder. Right? If you look at Jacob's ladder and the 33 rungs, that's your vertebrae right there. And you have it in tarot, you have it in the zodiac, it corresponds to the I Ching in China. And what I like about the I Ching, obviously, is that, come back to that operating system metaphor, it looks very much like my favorite metaphor, which is the punch card. Well, if you think about humans, you come to Earth, right, you have this punch card, and some holes are already filled out through genetics or epigenetics or perforated, right? Some things that you learn easily. And every time you learn something, you punch out a new hole and you see more of reality, right? And the more holes you have open, the more you comprehend about reality. What I like about this punch card thing is that it actually helped me understand why some people are super spiritual and super smart and amazing, talk to angels and all kinds of things. And then they cut you off on the way to the buffet and they're total assholes in real life. And you're like, what? But you're already advanced, you're already spiritual, and you're still behaving like that. I don't get it. Right? And it's really to understand that every one of us has these circuitry, and each of them we have holes open and some of them we have closed. Right? And there's some really simple people who have tremendous insight and wisdom, and some really educated people who are really stupid. Right? And it's both is there, and it's not about layering and, oh, once I'm on this level, I'm so much better. But it's really about understanding that we need to turn as many holes on as we can, right? And open up as many holes as we can, because we're here and this is our experience. So why wouldn't we want to understand as much about reality as possible? And it's, of course, never such a beautiful linear process. Right? Reality looks more chaotic and fractal. And there's even the idea that very big words, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. What that really means is, as the individual evolves, we essentially go through all of evolution of life. Right? If you think about you were one cell once, and two cells, and four cells, and eight cells, then plant-like inside of your mom's belly, and at some point got kicked out and crawled around like an amphibian, right, and learned how to walk and talk, and we're indoctrinated with the current cultural operating system to say, hey, this is what it means to be a man or a woman on this planet, and go find a job and do your job. But of course, when we talk about these things, it's important to understand that the map is never the territory. Right? Like, so whatever I'm presenting to you, that's not the truth. Right? It's just a map. I find it a very helpful map, and see how helpful it is to you. But this quote comes from Alfred Count Korzybski, who was the inventor of general semantics in the last century. I highly recommend his work. He actually talked about humans, and he said, okay, I can see three levels of consciousness here. Right? I can see sort of my body and sensing, and we have that in common with plants. Right? He called them chemical binders because plants seem to have consciousness and they communicate through chemicals. Then there's this next level where we have emotion, or the emotional territorial circuit, as Timothy Leary called it, where it's really about feeling, right, and moving towards what we like and moving away from what we don't like, right, the whole pain-pleasure thing. Right? And we have that in common with animals, and especially mammals. Right? They have that same limbic system in our brain, that second part of our brain. Like, we have a brain stem that deals with our body, deals with hormones, deals with blood, deals with all that stuff. And then we have a limbic system that constantly looks as, am I feeling good? Am I feeling bad? Am I feeling good? Am I feeling bad? Right? So there's that part that we have in common with them. And then, of course, I think, therefore I am. We have a mind, right? We can think. And that's sort of what people think is human. It's like we're so much better than animals and plants because we can think, right? But coming back to that punch card, each one of us still has holes closed in the body and holes closed in our emotions, where we still have plenty of lessons to learn, right? That some animals are actually much better at than we are. Right? They're actually smarter than we are in some ways. But this is also not all that makes up a human, right? Because we also have relationships, right? We can actually move our body around and emotions, our mind, and choose who we connect with and who we relate to. Right? We also have, so that's, if you think about that part is sort of our existential self, like the one that's in this world, right? And then we have this other part that wants to come in this world, right? A voice, a unique expression, right? Every one of us is different. We're all humans. We all have, some basics in common, but each one of us is unique. Right? Each one of us has a unique voice, a unique expression. And one of the first steps that people typically talk about in spiritual quest is the self-actualization. Right? To really say, hey, I realize that society is all that, but who am I? Who am I in all this? Who do I want to be? And what do I envision for the world? Right? What can I imagine? Right? We can actually imagine the future and imagine our future and make it happen. Right? And vision is actually required to make something happen in that way. Right? Animals and plants have routines, they do their thing. But if I want to build something, the first thing I have to do is imagine it. Right? Then I can build it. If I want to build a table, imagine the table, then I can sketch it, then I can figure out what materials I need, and I can build it. And of course, we all have that sort of calling, right? The calling to create and bring into the world, right? Whether it's coming in dreams to you, or whether it's coming in notions or through weird encounters with people, there's that thing that you're feeling called to do, right? Your unique participation in this reality and the future that you can create. It kind of corresponds loosely, I mean, as I said, this whole autogeny and phylogeny conversation with how we grow up too. If you think about it, and these are waves of development, right? Like the first year, most babies just spend finding their body. They look at their hand, they're like, oh, hand, look, I can move it, right? And they're excited about actually connecting to their body. They learn how to walk, right? And then you have the terrible twos, right? Where you're all about emotions. I feel good, I feel bad, mommy, okay, mommy, you're not okay. Right, it's a very basic level, and then we learn words to express ourselves. Right, slowly but surely, we have been indoctrinated into society around age 3, 4, right, and then we kind of create our artistic self. Comes out at age 5, and we begin to kind of look at the bigger picture, right, and all the traumas in a way. Our basic operating system is programmed by the time we're 7. Like if a world is a safe place, not a safe place, I'm okay, not okay, how I get what I want, how I get people to do what I want, all these very basic dynamics, we've actually learned them in that early age already. Right? If you look at people and you can actually begin to observe, trying to see the little 5-year-old, and you can tell that there's a little 5-year-old in all of us. It's still there, right? It's still the same kind of behaviors. And it also corresponds to needs, right? It's the other side. So why it's important to be aware of your operating system is to also be aware of your needs. Right? We have physical needs, we have survival needs. Right? And this is loosely based, if you look at Maslow, you might have heard about Maslow's pyramid of needs. It's not actually a pyramid or hierarchy, but he talked about survival needs, right? We need to eat, drink, sleep, those kind of things. We have safety needs, right? We want to feel good, we want to feel safe, we want to be like we can be okay, we can relax, right? So we have those kind of needs where we want to feel good and know that we're going to be okay tomorrow too. Right? We have self-esteem needs. We want to be seen for our ego. We want to be like cool. You know what I mean? We want to feel like, hey man, I'm bringing something here. Right? And be seen for that. We have social needs in the sense of connecting to other people. Right? We want to relate and we need community. None of us can do this alone. Right? We all need each other. So we have community needs. We also have actualization needs, as I was talking about earlier, right? When we begin to discover our voice and say, hey, this is who I want to be in this world. Right? This is where a lot of people who are beginning the path are kind of stuck a little bit because it's so cool, right? It's like, I'm doing my thing, right? And I just had this conversation with some artist friend of mine who's totally bulldozed a party. And afterwards I said, did you not notice how you're doing this? Well, in my world, it looked okay. I was just doing my thing, right? And this is where self-transcendence comes in, and even Maslow added that to his, description later. He said, at some point we need to overcome ourselves and get beyond ourselves and say, okay, cool, my expression is important, but what am I putting it in service to? Right? What am I integrating with that's bigger than myself, where I can bring my creativity to bear? And ultimately, we look for meaning. Right? We want to know why we're here. And meaning, in some ways, actually, funny enough, comes from the German word meinen, which means to make mine. Right? Because we grow up and we're conditioned by mother, father, preacher, teacher to be a certain way. And as we actually push that away and become ourselves, then it becomes meaningful, right? When we actually step outside of the existing system and make it our own. And I might still adopt some of those values. Like I have a lot of values that my parents have, but I needed to reject them first before they could be mine, right? Instead of just accepting them and saying, hey, this is how we do things, to actually say, you know what, I see why you're doing this and I actually agree. And I think it's a good value, right? When it becomes meaningful to yourself. The other reason, the other way to looking at this is also, of course, we have input, process, output, right? Like every system, and systems theory comes from biology. So something goes in, something goes on, something comes out, and then there's a feedback. Right? And so in every moment, stuff goes in. And if you look at yourself, right, the reason why this is important is because you want to be in resonance. Right? Imagine like every one part of yourself, like imagine yourself as an orchestra, for example, and every part of yourself is playing a different melody with total chaos, right? And you'll be in this like all over the place, right? And this is where most people are at, right? They say they want to create something in the world, but then they don't show up. They don't get off the sofa. They don't, change their diet. They don't, check in their emotions. They don't, control their thoughts. They don't manage their relationships, right? But they say, hey, I want to create something. Right? That's not going to work. Right? So it's really about bringing all of yourself into alignment. When you think about it, you can go look at those 3 parts, right? The input, what am I taking in? Right? What am I putting in my body every day? Am I putting enough water in it? Or am I giving it good nutrients and good food? Or am I eating just any shit, right? What am I taking in here? Right? Same with emotions, right? If I'm constantly around people who are angry and assholes and sad and depressed, you'll likely probably be angry and sad and depressed at some point yourself, right? Just from mirror neurons alone, right? If you're constantly around people who have, intense emotional states, you're going to constantly react to that. Right? And so what's making you feel safe around your emotions that you're creating for yourself? And the same thing with mind and information. Right? My favorite new word from 2020 is doom scrolling, where you just take your phone and just look at all the horrible news. Just one shitty thing after another, right? And it's like, but why do I do that to myself? Why do I really need to know that every day? No, not really. Right? And all the social media crap, there's so much wasted time of reading stupid articles that you really don't need to read. Right? So what are you taking in there? Right? What relationships are you taking in? Right? Are the people around you really supportive of who you want to be? Because every now and then, if you change and you transform, right, especially if you go into I'm going to create the future, some people will tell you that's risky and crazy and you shouldn't do that. Right? And you better get a safe job or like do something safe. Right? And of course, it's coming from a place of worry and care, but it's also coming from a place of codependence because they don't want you to change. Right? They want you to be who they know you to be. Right? And if you're changing, that's a threat to your relationship. Right? And so especially if you're doing transformational work, it's always important to keep checking in with your community and the people that matter to you. And also to check who maybe doesn't fit anymore. Right? And the same goes with, what voices are we taking in, what visions, what calling. Right? If I lived in Hollywood for many years and I always ask people, do you know one movie that portrays a positive human future? And to this day, it's like Star Trek and the Jetsons, and that's about all they could think about. Right? So whose visions am I adopting? What if I'm watching sci-fi and dystopian stuff all the time, and I'm adopting that as my vision of the future, then in all likelihood, I'm more likely to create that than an alternative future. And so really within that, the one thing that we always remind people of, self-care isn't selfish. Right? Take care of yourself, spend the time on your body, spend the time with right emotions, mind, all these different things, right? And take care of what you're taking into your system, because it's a very fragile, beautiful machine that you got there, right? And whatever you're putting into it will make a difference. And then we get to the process part, right? Like, so what can I do with this thing? Right? And if you think about all those needs too, one of the modalities I studied that I like a lot is alchemy. Right? In alchemy, they talk about the first rule of alchemy is that the alchemist has to do everything to himself that he does to the matter. Right? And if you think about that, when we hear alchemy, we typically think, oh, turn lead into gold. Right? But it really is about taking the material experience that you're having here and turning it into wisdom, turning it into beauty, turning it into something higher. Right? And for that, you have to burn shit, right? And calcination burning is really about consciously frustrating desires, right? Like, for example, we have, food or sexual desires, right? And if you think about the extreme case, it's asceticism, right? It's people who go on fasts or celibate or are purposely frustrating the desire in order to become available or able to control the desire better. Right? And so these times of when you look at monks and nuns and going into the forest or shamans, right, and not eating for a while, all those things are mostly tools to strengthen your will and strengthen your conscious relationship to your body. The second thing that you do in alchemy is dissolve things, right? And it's also what we like to do sometimes is to dissolve and let go and forget about our ego, forget about who we are, and dissolve in something bigger than ourselves. Right? And we can do that for different means. Even if we're in a crowd somewhere, we're dancing around with people and we're all dancing together, at some point it feels like we're all dancing. There's just a body dancing. It's not I dancing anymore, but I'm actually dissolving myself. The third is separation, is distinguishing. Right? And if you think about separation analysis, the word analysis means actually breaking into pieces, right? And making it concrete and separating it out. Right? And so it's also important to really strengthen your mind and your logic and become aware of the fact that we're all super fallible. Right? I mean, there's so many cognitive biases, right? And we have so many ways of thinking that we're so accustomed to, right? But they're just thoughts, they're just beliefs, they're not right. Right? They're just our beliefs. And so also to check in with them and make sure what's what, and to say, hey, is this really helpful anymore or not? Right? Or even with feelings, for example, I can feel good, I can feel bad. And there's a plethora of beautiful feelings, right? And if I actually look at the specific feelings and make the distinction, am I angry or am I frustrated or am I annoyed? What's really the experience I'm having right now? Not just not good. Then I can go and ask questions about that. Like, for example, if I'm angry, I can say, hey, okay, anger comes from a boundary violation. Which boundary violation was crossed? Right? Because if I'm frustrated, then it's because I've been trying to do something that's not working. Then maybe it's like, okay, what else can I do? Right? So they give us tools to actually, by distinguishing our emotions, they give me tools to interact with them and actually find a solution. In conjunction, obviously connecting, right? By the way, I'll be happy to send you the slides too if you want them afterwards. So no worries. And this way, I mean, I'm happy when people are writing things or taking pictures, but I'm always like, hey, man, you can get those slides anyway. I'm happy to share. So just let you know. But yeah, so conjunction is this connecting part, right? It's like, how am I relating and being in conscious relationship with others, right? And then fermentation, right? When something ferments, that means I put some stuff together and then letting it do its thing, right? And it's really like also seeing what wants to evolve, what wants to come out, and giving your voice some time, right? Sitting down with a piece of paper and just starting writing, or just start painting and see what wants to come out, right? And giving those moments to yourself. Distillation, right, is that next level of coming back to transcendence again. And now that I've gone through all these operations, what's left? What's really important? Right? What's really the essence that I can see here, and how does it connect to the future? And finally, the integration of it all, right? Once I've gone through those stages, to say, okay, cool, now I've become somebody new. Now I'm integrating all of that, and I'm going to the next step. Another system is very similar as yoga, right? And yoga, yoke, means connecting, right? Same, by the way, as religio, religare in Latin. Ligare means to connect, like ligament, right? And religare means to reconnect, right? So yoga and religion are essentially the same concept in the sense that whatever I do that makes me feel connected, right? And it can be healthy versions or it can be unhealthy versions too, right? If I'm singing along with a Nazi party march, I'm still connected, right? Maybe not to a great thing. If I'm dancing around with friends, connected, and hopefully very loving. So yoga is really about connecting, and you have the different kinds. Right? You have hatha yoga, which is really about purifying your system and your body. Right? You have bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of devotion. You see that, for example, for Hare Krishnas, right? They pray to Krishna every day, but it's not about Krishna. It's about invoking that thing in yourself that you're devoted to. Right? We see it in old medieval when the singer stands down there and sings to the beautiful lady up on the balcony. Right? He's not trying to get laid. He's actually just espousing her virtues, and by focusing on her virtues, trying to invoke that in himself. Right? So there's this devotional yoga, right? There's Jnana yoga, which is wisdom, just thinking and being clear. That makes sense, right? And there's karma yoga, which is you going out there and you're doing it, right? You're out there helping the community, your social engagement, whatever tools you're actually doing good karma, right, as your means of doing yoga. And then there's the higher forms. Raja yoga is one of the first in terms of where you now bring in voice and singing and your self-expression, right? And you have Kundalini, you have Tantra and Kriya, these higher kinds of yogas that activate these circuits, right? If I'm moving my body, I'm activating my physical intelligence, right? If I'm doing pranayama, conscious breathing, right? I'm activating my limbic system. But the easiest thing you can do when you're stressed is take a deep breath, right? Because if you take a deep breath, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system that releases 1,200 chemicals into your system that tells your body it's okay, you're safe. Right? So the breathing is to create emotional safety, right? And then the meditation part is really about getting your mind straight, so you know whose thought you're thinking right now. Right? So you can actually say, hey, wait, who's thinking this thought, rather than just having a barrage of thoughts all day long. Right? And those higher things are really about connecting to the more sensitive tools of yourself. And then, of course, you can do that with tools other than physical tools and substances. Right? If you think about these different parts of your body, they also correspond to different substances. And the basic level body is opiates. Right? If I'm in pain, what do? We take opiates. I don't feel the pain. Right? And if I take opium, you're right back to that primordial soup. You barely even hear. You're right? I live in a stretch in Berlin. There's a lot of junkies. And it's really sad to see them, sometimes, because you can tell they're just completely dissolved. They're not even really here. On the second level, on the emotional level, we have alcohol, right? Which is actually why the Egyptian, started brewing beer, right? Was to actually up-level people. What do you think about Dionysus and Bacchus, those old Greek and Roman gods, right? Those wine festivals and getting drunk together, right? Even the Christian church still has wine as a sacrament, right? That getting drunk is actually dissolving your ego a little bit, right? And it's also amplifying emotional patterns. So if you're, kind of happy person and a lover, When you're drunk, probably you're one of those lovey-dovey people who goes, hey man, I love you so much, man, you're my best friend. I've always wanted to tell you you're my best friend, right? You're probably doing something like that. Or if you have emotional issues that are not correct, you might turn into a really mean drunk. Like, what do you say about my mother? Right? And go into that kind of situation. So we can see when people drink alcohol, kind of you can get a very amplified vision of their emotional landscape. Right? And very quickly see how healthy they are emotionally by how they react when they're drunk. And then of course there's the mind, right? And that started, if you think about caffeine, for example, all the teines, all the enes really, right? Teine, caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, amphetamine, all the enes go in that direction to help make you think real sharp, right? And if you think about that's actually been used even as a military tool. If you think about the Ottoman Empire and the reason why they were successful, not just in warfare, but also in math and all the things that we owe to the Arab world, they had a lot of caffeine. Right? They actually brought coffee to Europe. Right? And all the people like Kant and Voltaire and all the German philosophers, they love the coffee, right? Because it's smart, right? You can think, right? Voltaire supposedly drank 40, 50 cups a day, right? To be really high. And even wrote a piece on how to get you perfect high with coffee. And you see it later in Freud was a huge fan of cocaine. Right? Freud shot a lot of cocaine actually, and thought it was the best thing to do when you want to, think straight. And you see it with amphetamines, even like the Blitzkrieg, the Nazis, for example, they won early on in the war because of amphetamines, right? Because the Blitzkrieg worked because suddenly these guys were up for 3 days straight, riding their tanks, right? And the French were expecting them 2 days later, and suddenly they're on their doorstep, right? And so again, also very aggressive kind of drug. And typically, if you think about the enes, that male sharpness, right? It can also be very hurting and mean. And some people, there's a beautiful saying about how cocaine enhances your personality. And if you're already an asshole, you'll be more of an asshole, right? So it's a bit of that. Then with relationships, I'm not quite sure, honestly. I put cacao here, which is probably the closest I can think of in terms of really becoming aware of relationship, right? And that love feeling that you have and that connection feeling you can get from cacao. Voice is really THC, right? If you're smoking weed, suddenly you're high, right? You're above, you have that actually, you're waking in the transpersonal perspective. Suddenly you're looking at your hand, you're like, dude, that's my hand, what's up with my hand, right? But you're actually above yourself, right? And so it helps you to look at yourself and actually also do personal development work, because you can look at yourself and say, hey, what is going on with my body? What's going on with my emotions? What's going on with my mind? Right? So it's giving you this higher level of perception of self. And then you have obviously high level entheogens, psilocybin, mushrooms, mescaline, peyote, or San Pedro, MDMA, LSD, those kind of things, that are essentially taking away typical perception filters and creating a new level of neuroplasticity, right? Where you can now see something for something else. And you don't decide that this is a glass or a table or a chair, but you can be like, wow, there's stuff moving there. And it kind of could be all kinds of things, right? So you're opening up to new things. And it's also, because of that, a hugely helpful therapeutic tool. Right? You might have heard about some of the studies people have done with PTSD and MDMA, for example, where it's really helped people overcome significant trauma. Right? And to my point earlier about how our operating system is sort of built in the first 7 years, right? When you're a baby, your brain is still super pliable and open like Play-Doh, and every experience you have makes a new pathway in your brain, right? And at some point, when you're here, you always go down here. Right? And you can try and recondition it, but if that pathway is really deeply imprinted, it's hard to change that. Right? And so this is where the shamanic traditions come in, or these kind of tools come in, because we can create a neuroplasticity, which means your brain is really pliable and open again, and you can create a new imprint, right, very deeply. So you can really meta-program, and actually Timothy Leary called this circuit the meta-programming circuit, because once you open that up, you can actually go down, and according to him, even all the way to DNA reprogramming of yourself. And then you have the final, up here I put ketamine and DMT and salvia. Those are the things that completely take you out of your body, or essentially rip your crown open and download information. And whether you like it or not, you're going to have some new information to deal with. So all of those tools, again, can be really applicable and can be totally the wrong thing. It depends on who you are. Right? And in general, the basic rule that Timothy Leary put out is set and setting. Right? What's your psychological stance? Like, where are you coming from? Right? Are you going in with frustration, anger, and sadness? Or are you going in with a desire to heal and to grow and to evolve? Right? So the set is super important, and the setting is super important. right? Meaning what's around you. Right? So, for example, I think it's a horrible idea to take a bunch of MDMA and go party. Right? I would, rather there's other things you can do, but there's so many possible things that can go wrong. Right? For example, I had a friend who, when she was 13 or 14, took LSD and suddenly had a voice in her head that said, you have to go kill yourself. And so she had to wake up her parents and turn this whole drama, and they put her into drug rehab right afterwards. And from then on out, she had anxiety attacks for the rest of her life. Until she actually recognized that she pretty much programmed that into herself in that moment, right? And that voice that said, go kill yourself, it didn't mean go kill your body and kill your life. It meant let go of who you've been so you could become somebody new. Right? But if you don't have a setting in which there's somebody that can explain that to you or hold space for you, that can go really dark very quickly. Right? And so especially once you go above THC, I would say make sure you have somebody there that can support you in that vision, can support you in your learning, support you in your growth, and hold your process, right? So that you can go anywhere and actually heal yourself. And then finally, really think about what output are you creating, right? Like how you're walking through the world. As I said, you have a beautiful smile already. I can tell you walk around the world and you smile at people, right? And the best way to change the world is walk around and smile at people, because then they smile back and then they feel better and we both feel better and the whole world feels better. Right? And so, what is your body? How are you putting that out? What emotions are you creating around yourself? Right? What information are you sharing? Right? Like there's people who send me emails I don't even look at anymore, and they mean well, and they're trying to change the world and do all kinds of good things. And their emails are like this long, and they're totally, I don't even want to read them because they're full of junk. Right? And so really think about what are you sharing out there? Right? How are you showing up in your relationships? Right? How are you sharing your voice? Right? Your beautiful, unique creativity, how are you bringing that out to the people? How are you sharing vision? How are you sharing your calling? Right? And so to really become aware of those parts of the output as well. Because in the end, we're all creating ripples. Right? We're all a little drop in water, and every thought we have, every deed we have, everything we do, right? Even if you sit in our own little room and feel like shit, that vibration is going out into the universe. Right? And so what kind of ripples are you creating? Right? And how do you see yourself in this cosmic game that we're playing here? And really think about what kind of future you want to create. Right? Like how are people showing up? How are people treating each other? And the best way you can do is begin living it, right? Begin being it, begin continuously reprogramming yourself, right? It's not like from tomorrow on I'm going to be a saint, right? That's bullshit, because we all know how hard it is to quit smoking or do things like that or change weight, or it's a process, right? And there's habits that we want to form. I don't know if you know about James Clear. He just wrote a book called Atomic Habits. It's one of the best I've seen around changing habits. But in the end, it's really about kind of moving that tunnel a little bit more into that direction, a little bit more into that direction, right? And that's really all we can ever do, is to affect the probabilities of what's around us. And that's it. That's what I got for you. So pleasure to hang out with you, Trey. Thank you for hanging in and listening.
Thank you for sharing.